Thank you, guys.
I'm thrilled to welcome Sarah Koenig as the host and producer of Serial, the podcast, one of the most listened to podcasts of all time.
The most listened
The
to.
most listened to of all time.
Yeah.
Super clear on that one. In fact, the last stat I could find was in 2016 with over 80 million downloads of the first season alone. Do you have an updated stat for us?
Oh, I should have checked right before I came. I think the last stats I saw were from the spring, and I think it was the whole number. It was like something like 260 million downloads.
Amazing.
Or something like that, for all across both seasons.
Very
Yeah,
cool.
no, it's a lot.
We're thrilled and honored to have you with us at Experience Week today. So again,
Thank you
thanks
for
for
having
joining.
me.
Appreciate
no,
it.
I'm really
Yeah,
happy to
thank
be
you.
here. Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys.
So I had this little bit of a fantasy in my mind going on where I watched your appearance on the Colbert Show, and you talked about the neighbor who started calling you Big Time, right? Every time you'd walk in, they'd, hey, Big Time. And I feel like maybe most of us who have watched or listened to the podcast have sort of in our minds built up this connection, right, with the story and with you. And so I sort of had this idea in my mind that when we saw each other, I could say, hey, Big Time, and you'd respond and say, hey, Kylan, great to see you. But I'm glad we had kind of a moment out there, and we're really thrilled to have you here.
Thanks.
I wanted to talk a little bit first and foremost about podcast or this great product, but you're a journalist. And so as a journalist, maybe just talk a little bit about what is your product?
That's interesting. Like, I get always a little scratchy when someone uses a word like product or content, because it makes it feel like I'm just here to sell something or like fill a space just to like make some dough. And we like to make some dough. That's not a thing. But no, I have a very, very old-fashioned notion of what it is that I do. And I feel like it's a little embarrassing to talk about it in these terms, but I do feel like reporters have this incredible opportunity and responsibility that we get to have a platform to tell other people things about whatever. And like that's truly, that is my job, is to just like talk about stuff that basically it's me deciding, or our company deciding, like, what is it that we feel like is important and we want to spend time on and like needs to be known. Like, what is a thing people don't understand and we wish we understood better and the world understood better, and like then we get to go do that. So I feel like it's like kind of almost like a sacred responsibility in a way. Like, it's a big, big deal to have people trust you and tell you like, this is what happened to me, or this is how I feel about something, and they're trusting me to like then go put it out in the world. And so that's kind of how I think about it. And I have to say, since Serial, like when Serial became this big thing, that hit me. I didn't really think of my job that way before. I was just like, I'm a reporter and it's fun and I make stories and I get paid and it's great. But after Serial, I was like, wow, that is a big, big responsibility to have people trust you with that. And to be like, you're telling me something maybe emotional, maybe intimate, maybe really difficult. And like, I'm going to turn around and like tell her, you know what I mean? Like, would you do that? Like, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't trust anybody with that. So I take it really seriously. I do think of it in just this very old fashioned, like, it's my job to shine a light on stuff that is wrong, basically, is going wrong, like in our country or in our democracy, or you know what I mean? And like, maybe we could do better. We should just at least be asking the question, can we do better?
I like the idea of, again,
that sounded really pretentious.
No.
I just realized, I know, that's why it's hard to talk about, because I'm like, I know, it does not sound fun, but it's really fun.
On one side, you've got the trust that you deliver to the people that you work with.
We hope, yeah.
Your different informants and things like that, and the people you reach out to. And then also you've got the trust of the audience. And people who know that you're going to sort of get to the bottom of things and tell the whole story, which is something I'd like to talk about a little bit later. One of the things that sort of surfaced throughout the Serial journey was a lot of online chatter around, what's your real motive here, right? Are you...
What's my real motive?
Yeah, right.
Oh, okay.
So it's like people would say, are you sort of working on criminal justice issues? Is this part of like the Innocence Project? Are you connected somehow? But everyone was really kind of curious about these ulterior motives that were sort of somehow in the background. But you came back and you said, look, I tell stories. And this is what the product sort of is. You didn't use those words. And so maybe talk about the difference between pandering towards maybe some of the things that you have as a personal agenda versus the scoop that you think needs to be heard.
I think as a reporter, as a journalist, right, like those lines are supposed to be very, very hard. Like, there's a firewall, should be, between your own politics, your own advocate. I mean, you cannot be an advocate for anything. You can't be an advocate. And I'm asked now all the time, like, can you come talk to the Innocence Project or help us raise money for the, and I'm just like, I cannot, I don't know. That's not what I'm doing. I am not an advocate. But sometimes I have to my response is be like, I want to help, it's a good cause. And then I'm like, I can't do that. No. And so you have to step back. So you just have to be really clear. I think it's okay, and other reporters will disagree with me, right, about this, but I think it is okay if you have researched something thoroughly enough and rigorously enough. I think it is okay to take a position and say, I've looked at this from every which way. I didn't come in with an agenda. I didn't come in with a point of view. I was open. I was as open as I knew how to be as a person. And that's hard. You have to force yourself because you think you know stuff, or you have opinions, or you have friends who are in the, all of us come, right, with certain biases. So you have to sort of be aware of your biases, try to set them aside, and just be like, just teach me. I'm here to learn. Just teach me. But then you get to the end of that road and you're like, no, there's an up or down here. And I think it's okay to say you really have to do your homework to get there and to be trusted by the audience, to not feel like, oh, you just were headed here all the time and you were pretending to look into this, but you really, so it's a real effort to stay open, which is where I really rely on my colleagues, actually. I mean, I do not make Serial alone. I don't work alone, where it's incredibly collaborative, which probably is here too. Where people check you all the time and be like, why are you saying that? Or why do you think that? Or what do you mean? And you're like, what do I mean? Wait, maybe I have no idea what I'm talking about. Let me go ask some more questions. It's a thing we think about all the time, of even the questions we're asking, are those coming from a certain bias? You know what I mean? But you really have to, that's kind of the fun part, honestly. If I'm just going out talking about stuff I already think I know, that's not interesting. It's not interesting for me. I don't think it's going to be interesting for the audience either. That is the cool part of my job, is I get to learn about stuff I had no idea. And just have my mind blown all the time of wait, that's how it works? You've got to be kidding me. That's how it works? And then you would be like, you guys, check it out. Look how it works.
But one of the things that really captured me and surprised me about your position on the first series was there was what felt like an extreme amount of vulnerability.
Yeah.
And so you kind of took us on this journey with you around, I don't know if I like Adnan or not. I contrast that to season 2, that did feel more journalistic in that it was, let me just give you the scoop, here's what's going on. And there wasn't that same vulnerability where everyone sort of felt kind of in limbo with you. Right. And I'm curious what you learned about storytelling between seasons 1 and season 2.
It's interesting. It was a really different, like you're saying, the relationship. I didn't really have a relationship with Bo Bergdahl. I spoke to him a couple times on the phone. I never met him in person. I tried to, and it sort of fell apart. And so I really didn't have that. I didn't have access to him, And so in the beginning, we really worried, what is my way into this story? How am I gonna? What is my role here? What am I doing? And whereas with first season, it was so obvious. It was this thing came to me, I got really interested, something seems messed up here, let me go figure this out, And then over time, you can't help it. You're talking to a person for an hour each time, sometimes several times a week for a year. That's a relationship. You like it or not, that is a relationship with all the complications of any kind of personal relationship, but also professional relationship, journalistic relationship. So it's complicated. It's very complicated. Bo, I didn't have any of that, really. You know what I mean? I didn't have the, what's he going to say tomorrow when I ask him this thing? So it was a little hard at first to be what's my way in? But then I got to say, what the thing that kind of turned me, first of all, the tape of him, guy who did all the recordings was Mark Bowl, a filmmaker. And so Mark's tape with Bo was so weird and kind of just unlike any tape I'd heard in a situation like that, because it wasn't a formal journalistic interview. It was sort of just it was these two guys just sort of talking about this incredible thing that Bo had been. So I felt the tape was just really interesting and strange and kind of cool. And then, but once I started talking to the other soldiers who knew Bo and who were in his unit or in his platoon or whatever, that's when I was like, oh, now I kind of get it. Like that felt like more my way. I feel like more my relationships ended up being with those guys who were sort of around Bo and who were affected by it in all of these different ways and who sort of changed over time, even over the time of my reporting changed about how they felt about what had happened. So yeah, it's much more muted, right? So it was in a way more reporterly, I think, or more traditional reporterly. And I know like a lot of what people liked in season 1 is just like, oh, I feel like I'm identifying with you because that's how I would feel maybe if I were confronted with all this information and didn't know what to make of it. And I think people wanted that more for the second season, but it didn't call for it. Like it would have just been a, what's the word?
Been too forced to try to.
Yeah, it would have been forced. Yeah, if it just been like a little trick, like, oh, here, like we check this box and like let's make you kind of more of a character and make you seem more vulnerable. You know, like it would have just been so fake. So I'm not sure there was like a big lesson between season 1 and season 2. I think, well, part of the lesson is we did not want to be deep inside private people's lives in the same way we were in season 1. Like we didn't. That was really hard.
Wait, what do you mean by that? Like just psychological challenges, or?
Well, psychological challenges because when it got so popular, I mean, keep in mind, like, we're public radio producers, right? Like, we're, like, no one cares, you know what I mean? Like, whatever, you know, like, I work on a radio show, like, it's a good radio show, but, like, we had nothing we'd ever worked on had remotely gotten this much attention. Like, so our expectations when we were like, let's do this little project and like, oh, we'll make a new radio show. Like we thought, okay, we'll make a new radio show. And then partway in, Julie, my partner, Julie Snyder, who's the executive producer and like sort of a genius at what she does, was just like, let's try it as a podcast. And I was like, podcast? And she was like, yeah, like no risk. Like if it sucks, no one will hear it. Like it's quick to produce.
Slip out in the night.
You don't have to sell it to radio stations. It can be any length we want. We can swear. Like you can do. It's just you have all this freedom. Like no one listens to them, so it's like whatever. It's good. That's great. And we thought like, how much money? Like how many listeners would we need? How many downloads would we need to like justify a second season? We were like 300,000 would be good. You know. I mean, we had 300,000 5 days after we launched the first episode. You know
You're
what I mean?
This
so
podcasting thing's easy.
So I know. So it was just like it blew up in this way, and so. Obviously, like as a reporter, and it's not like I'm 20 years old and this is my first go around, right? Like I'm a grown up, I've been doing this a long time. I'm careful with sources. I tell them who we are. But most of the people I was interviewing, they hadn't heard of This American Life. They don't know what that's not their world. They were just like, whatever. So they just thought like, I'm talking to some random lady, you know? And then suddenly it's like, people are finding out your address. They're posting pictures of you. Your criminal record is online suddenly and posted. People are knocking on your door. People are taking photographs. You know, like we had exposed all of these just like normal private people going off their lives to just this giant fishbowl of millions of people.
And you felt conflict with that?
Of course, I felt responsible for people who were having an adverse effect because of that, which some of them did. Of course, you feel horrible. You know, I didn't think, well, I shouldn't have done that story, but it's, it was like a whoa. I didn't know. I would have warned you. Mm-hmm. So it's like other stories. Then when we were trying to find a story for season 2, there was particularly this one case that was also a crazy criminal, like a death situation, and it wasn't clear if it was a accidental or a murder or whatever. And we sort of kept coming back to it, like, this is so interesting. This case for all kinds of social and political reasons as well. And then we were just like, we looked at it and we're like, I can't do it again. I cannot. I need a break. So it was actually kind of a relief to just be like, I'm going to just be a little more arm's length now. Let's just like take a break. Everybody knew that it was a national story before we came along, Bo Berg. I mean, it was a huge national story, right?
So at that point, people could kind of opt in if they wanted additional
kind of, or I just felt like
publicity.
We're not exposing Bo Bergdahl and his family and the people who love him or these soldiers or whatever. They've already been, this is already out there in a way. Like, I think we brought a lot of more nuanced reporting, I would say, to what happened. But it wasn't, we weren't introducing this to the world. Whereas with Adnan Syed's case, except for a few people in Baltimore or Maryland or whatever, nobody knew about that. Wasn't a thing, right? So it was kind of a relief to just be like, okay, national story, we're going to come in and like do what we do and find out what we want to find out about this situation. So in a way it was a choice, but that was a lesson, I guess, from season. I don't know if it was a lesson. It was a feeling from season 1. It was an after effect of season 1. But more, I would say the larger answer, and I could have said this much quicker, like 10 minutes ago, I realized. But truly, the content of the story, whatever the story is determining the structure. It just is. You're not going in with a formula. It's like, yes, we had this big success with season 1, and so, boy, people really like a murder mystery, and boy, they really like it if you're a relatable, vulnerable narrator, and boy, they really like it if there's like a mysterious phone call you can't try. You know what I mean? Like, yes, people do like those things in a plot. That was the best way we could figure out to tell that story. But every story is so, so different and has such different challenges. And like, yeah, one of the biggest challenges we had for season 2 is I don't have access to the main character. How do you deal with that? How do you get around that? And so we figured out the best way we knew how to get around that, but it didn't call for me being like, I can't figure this out, and I'm so confused. And not that I was faking it the first time, because I was not. But you know what I mean? To lay that on as some like fakey fake thing would just be like, what is she doing?
No, it's
like,
good insight that you started with the story. And
you
then you figured out the
absolutely
structure
start with the story
from there.
Yeah, so the reporting I've been doing the last year, right, which I don't want to talk about too much because...
You heard it here first.
You heard it here first. So it's just like a ton of reporting, and we've been doing that for a year, and only now, literally like next week, are we going to sit down and be like, how do we tell this? What is the best structure for this? What is like, where we go? How are we going to... What sort of architecture and ideas are we going to bring to tell this story the best way we know how? It is it's the end thing you do. You don't start there.
One of the things that we discussed before you came in was that we actually really admired that it's pretty often when someone has a great first act that the tendency is to hit the rinse and repeat button, right, and just sort of replay it.
Oh, it's tempting.
And it felt like you made a deliberate shift in the second season to try something new. And then with S-Town and kind of other things going on, it just felt like there was a curiosity and instinct. And this makes more sense now to say, look, when you start with the story, it takes you down different structures rather than the other way around. And in a world where more and more, like everything, if you looked at market data, everything would say that people's attention spans are going like this, right?
Yeah.
And if you were to like really maybe go get market data and understand sort of what's winning and what YouTube videos are working and et cetera, it seems like the right outcome of this would have been to do a one-page infographic summarizing the case and the narrative and the outcome,
Or
right?
like top 10 things you need to know.
Exactly, like 5 tips and tricks to the case, exactly.
Exactly, yeah.
But in spite of all that, you went, like, maybe if it's possible to go 180 degrees the other direction,
Right.
to like long-form journalism.
Right.
And, you know, just kind of curious in your mind, I think even, you know, when you won the Peabody Award, I guess, the podcast, it sort of validated the importance of that type of media.
Right.
And I just was curious sort of what you see now, and is it still something you really care deeply about versus sort of these highlight reels, et cetera?
Oh, I mean, totally. It's just like also not my nature. You may have noticed, like, I spend a long time answering questions. Like, I'm not a pithy. It's not my strength. No, I really, that was, I have to say, like the most thrilling thing. Not the most thrilling. It was one of like, it was so gratifying. Yeah, that we had, you know, we start the thing. We have no idea if this is interesting to anyone besides us. I mean, we had a little bit of a sense, but
what was the insight? Why did you go the other direction when it could have been?
Well, we don't do that kind of journalism anyway. Like I've never, you know what I mean? I've been a radio reporter I was a newspaper reporter for a long time. And yeah, you do shorter things, but I've been a radio reporter at that point for like a decade. It's just not what we do. It's not what we're interested in. And so my stories, in fact, over time at This American Life are getting longer. And finally I was just like, oh, just give her the hour. You know, I was like taking up the whole hour just because that's where my interest lies. And in fact, the idea for Serial, the way I got that idea was that I was driving a lot in a certain period in like 2013. And I had to drive from where I live in Pennsylvania down to North Carolina a bunch of times for a story. And so I had these long drives. And so I was getting books on tape. And like the kind you get from your library with like the CD where you put it. Yeah. And I would get so absurd in the same way of just like, I didn't care suddenly that I had a 9-hour drive. You know, I was like, fine, I'll listen to this novel. And I loved it. And I was like, why can't we do that on the radio? Like I would love to do that with just like nonfiction, book on tape, nonfiction. We'll tell a story over time, chapter by chapter. Like, well, how about that? I'm into the long, you know, and I love that. I love for myself, but also as a listener or a reader or a watcher of a documentary, I love getting immersed in a world and learning all about that world and sort of forgetting, you know, the outside world. So that's what I wanted to do.
Is it safe to say maybe an important takeaway from that then is that it came from a deep place of authenticity, right? This wasn't like a, hey, I'm a short form writer, let me try this long form thing because I think it'd be cool. But like, this sounds like it was your wheelhouse, where it was your go-to.
No, I mean, I think like one of the luckiest, most wonderful things about working where I've worked for the past decade, which is the radio show that's American Life, is I've literally never heard anyone say, oh, here's what the listeners want, but the listeners want this, or people really love it when we do X. No one is talking that way. It's what are we interested in? What's exciting? What seems challenging? What seems fun? And that's a total position of privilege and luxury to be able to do that. Like, I recognize that. We have the company has the money to be able to sustain that, you know what I mean? And not worry too much about if people don't like a story, whatever. We thought it was important, or we thought it was good, or it was challenging in this way that seemed fun and exciting, so we tried it, and whatever, new show next week. You didn't like that one? Whatever, you know? So there's just never been a like, what are the metrics, what's the data, let's try to satisfy it. We don't have to do that. I
mean, because
we're lucky.
You still have things like ratings and things you're worried. Like you even said, you set sort of a target of 300,000 downloads to sort of justify season 2.
Right.
But it's pretty common for, especially in the marketing world, for people to talk about how the pendulum sort of swung really far over into the digital marketing side. And it was all about really insightful, data-driven answers and approaches. And what they see now, and there's this general kind of consensus that they see it swinging back over into like true storytelling, and that discipline sort of reemerging. And so, yeah, maybe what's the line that you dance? Because you mentioned no one's ever said like, hey, what are the ratings going to be or whatever else, and making that drive sort of how you think about approaching a show. But clearly there's some balance about how do we make sure we tackle things that are meaningful and will make an impact to a broad enough audience that they're worth tackling. So maybe walk us through the balance there.
It's funny, like the show that we're working, I don't want to undersell it. I'm really interested in it. I hope it's going to be great. I think it's important. It's criminal justice related. I care about it. Julie cares about it. We've hired this other producer working on it. Emmanuel, he cares. Like, we all care. I don't think it, I'm not
There's
supposed
no
to
data.
say
You're
this.
saying there's no data there.
But like, it's not going to be season 1. You know what I mean? It's not going to be the like you know. It's not. It's just not. It's not. I know it's not because I understand the public's whatever. And so we just had this conversation. So there are 3 of us who own the company, and we just had this conversation of just like, well, you know, the advertising and the money, and like, here's our budget, and like, and what do we do? And like, finally, you know, Ira Glass, who's a third owner, said like, if it doesn't work, we run out of money, so Serial goes away, and we do something else we like. Who cares? Like, that's I'm not kidding. Like, I know, and I know,
cool.
I know that's not like a lesson for other people, but I'm just saying that's how free we actually, and we all were kind of like, Serial stops being a thing. Oh, I guess that's an option. Like, I was like, oh, all right, yeah, we can just do something else. Try something else. I like making money as much as the next guy, you know what I mean? But we're just like not.
There seems to be
we're
something.
Not driven by it.
There seems to be something very liberating though about.
It's super
that mentality.
liberating. Where I'm just like, I can pay my mortgage. My kids can go to college. Like, I'm okay. We're all healthy. Like, we're good. I make a little more, a little less.
Okay, so on that.
I don't know. I know that's not the answer you're looking for,
No,
but
no, it's great.
But it's not occurring to us to say like, I don't think we should do this project. It's just not going to sell to advertisers in the same way. It's not going to have the numbers. At no point did anyone say we shouldn't do it.
How do you choose your stories then, right? So you've had this next one you're working on, and there'll be another one after that.
Oh, well.
So maybe.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, so what is the criteria? Like, what are the values that you sort of line up against, whether it's based on the values that you want to share with the audience or your own values, the values of the studio? How do you think about picking the next story?
It's so hard. It's so hard. And again, there like isn't really a formula. I mean, it's really driven by what we're interested in and not just me. I mean, yeah, if I came along and said to Julie, like, I am just fascinated by like butterflies and like we really should, you know, I think she'd probably be like, I have another project I'd rather be doing. But you know what I mean? Like, if I were forcing something, like, I'm sure I could do it. But more, it's really the 2 of us or 3, you know, 2 of us, 2 to 3 of us. And it's our common, like, we'll just sort of talk about stuff and be like, did you read this thing? Did you read that thing that just came out oh my God, did you just read this book? And so we're talking about stuff we've read and stuff that's happening nationally with criminal justice stuff particularly we're all interested in. And And so we just start, and then we're like, well, what if we try, you know? So it's more, it just kind of wiggles around. Like there was another story that we worked on for quite a long time that like we just had to set aside. Like it just wasn't working, and we set it aside. But I have to say, it's genuinely from what are we interested in, just kind of because we're interested in it, and also. Then the hard part is like, well, what is the story? What is the narrative that we would tell? Who are the characters? Are they good? Are they compelling? Are we going to spend time with them? I mean, a huge question for us is like, we have to go live in this world now for the next year or year and a half or even 2 years. You have to really like it or be compelled by it enough. And so that's sometimes like a hard call of like, yeah, but that guy's so annoying. Like, I can't do it, you know? And so like, forget it.
So if there's not a connection of some sort, you're over it. There's no way you're going to go down that road if you can't feel like there's a connection either to the story, to the people.
Yeah, if it's just like we don't like it, you know, or there's something like, I don't want to be talking to this person for the next year. Like I can't, then we don't do it. Because you really have to, it's not going to work as a story. If you don't love it, you're not going to, I can't then communicate that to the audience. I mean, and I'm not just talking about my stories. I mean, if you guys think about, or you think about the stories that you've heard that you love, it's so apparent that the person telling that story loves it equally. That's what's being communicated to you, is like your excitement or confusion or passion about that thing. That's kind of what's keeping all of those listeners with you. So, I mean, if that's like fire is not happening at home, like it's not gonna work anyway.
So maybe an awkward question. Did you love the story of season 1 more or less than the story of season 2? Like if you were gonna stack rank those personally, like how'd they fit for you? Again, connectedness to the people and the whole thing.
So I feel like I was definitely sort of more personally connected to season 1 for reasons. If you've listened to season 1, it's clear. So that felt more like in my heart a little more, just because I'd gotten to know those people in some cases pretty well, or felt like I knew them. It was sort of more personal. As a story, I sort of feel more compelled by season 2, I have to say. And I think it was sort of better journalism, probably, too. It was way more ambitious. I think people don't hear it that way, but for us, it was way more ambitious. It was a much bigger learning curve for all of us. I mean, I'm not a national security, I'm not a military reporter, you know. So I was starting at 0. I mean, I'd have these conversations with soldiers and just be like, I'm sorry, a lieutenant is higher than a captain? You know what I mean? I was like one of those people, and they'd be like, whoa, all right, so let me just break it down for you, like brigade, but you know what I mean? So I was really coming in at 0, and it was exciting, and then to sort of try to make sense of that world, and I don't know, don't get me started on season 2, but I ended up really loving that story. I mean, that seems like a weird thing to say, like, I love this story about this guy who got kidnapped, and then we traded, you know, Taliban from Koenig. But just the stakes of it were so high, you know, and I think actually for all of us, not just for the people in the story, the stakes of it are so high. And just like to hope that you're maybe communicating a little bit of that to an audience that doesn't give a crap about the war in Afghanistan, just to be like, here's why maybe you could care for a second. And like, can we all think about this a little harder? That felt very important to me. Does that answer your question? Not really.
No, it does. Thank you. And I think back to, well, we're running short on time. It feels like this is something we could talk about all day.
Yeah.
And clearly you've invested a lot of time in your career into these amazing podcasts that have been so successful and influenced our lives as well. So thank you. Last question.
Sure.
I think it's the question on everybody's mind.
Uh-oh.
Did he do it?
Oh, no, you can't do that.
No,
I'm not going to dignify that one.
You end the season by, you know, being pretty clear. Like, if you were on the jury, here's the decision I would need to make.
Right.
But I think, you know, a lot of us, I certainly have scoured online and seen what kind of new information has been released or revealed. But do you still have the same perspective, or, you know, with now a few years behind you, has anything changed? No. I mean, like it's funny. It's like, I definitely didn't want him to be guilty. You know, I don't want him. So like I would love it if it went there, you know what I mean? And just because I like Adnan, you know, I really like Adnan, and
And I don't want anyone to have done something so hard. It's like you don't want it to have happened. But like, has there been some piece of evidence I've learned from back in 2014 to now that's just like, aha, that's the piece I needed to fall either way?
Nothing yet.
No. I mean, the biggest piece of evidence that came forward was about, the cell phone testimony. It's very technical. I will not bore you with it. But what that sort of nailed down to me was like, oh, the prosecution's case was even weaker than we knew. So like, that really cemented for me, like, right, they didn't prove their case. I mean, I already didn't think they had, but that was more just like, aha, yeah, that was really bad. But no, I can't say. And this is one thing I've really learned, and especially like as I get older, I feel like more and more and more is like this kind of like, I know in my heart, or like I feel it in my gut, and I just know, I got the feeling.
Not gonna work for you.
It's not real. Like, no, I know nothing. My gut doesn't understand anything, heart, brain, like nothing. Like, yeah, I'm with Anana, like, give me the facts. Just give me the facts. The rest of it is bullshit.
Our guest today has been Sarah Koenig from the Runaway Success podcast, Serial. Thanks for joining us today.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks.
Sure. It was a good question.